back in my senior year of high school. Because my family was poor, every day at the school cafeteria, I would only order a single vegetable dish with rice and free soup. Back then, I was both insecure and introverted, without a single friend. But there was a girl who actively came and sat right next to me, picked a piece of green vegetable out of my lunch tray, and popped it in her mouth. Then she took the sweet and sour ribs and braised pork from her own tray and placed them into mine. I ate one of your greens. Consider this payback. Don't turn your nose up at it. She was like a ray of light that appeared in my unremarkable life and shone right into my heart. And from that very moment on, I had a goal worth striving for the rest of my life. My name is Chunyu, and my family lives in an old flat in the suburbs of the county. My parents rely on odd jobs and growing some vegetables to make a living. Mom helps others pick vegetables at the vegetable market, earning 40 yuan a day. Dad goes to construction sites to carry bricks. When there's work, it's 80 yuan a day. And when there isn't, he squats in the courtyard smoking cigarette after cigarette. I also have a younger sister, who is 5 years younger than me. She has been sickly and asthmatic since childhood, and her illness flares up whenever the seasons change. She coughs all night long in the middle of the night, unable to sleep. Medical bills, tuition fees, and daily expenses weighed down on the whole family like a mountain, and no one dared to get sick or have any extra expenses. In my senior year of high school, my daily meals were fixed. A 3 yuan vegetable dish from the cafeteria, stir-fried cabbage or braised tofu, along with 50-cent rice, and free clear soup. The clear soup was just pot washing water, with a pinch of salt sprinkled in, floating with a few bits of vegetable leaves. Although plain and tasteless, it was warm, and pouring it into my stomach at least kept it from growling. Meal after meal, it was always like this. I never ate with my classmates. Every day at noon, when the class bell rang, I would deliberately dawdle, pretending to pack my school bag, pretending to flip through books, and waiting until the people in the classroom had all left, before walking across the playground alone, and going around to the very corner at the back of the cafeteria. That spot was right next to the water dispenser barrel, and it had a sour, damp smell. No one wanted to sit there, which happened to be fine for me as I huddled up there, like a shadow that couldn't see the light. I would mix the vegetable dish and the rice together, lower my head and eat it quickly, not daring to look up or look at anyone, afraid of seeing the braised pork, sweet and sour ribs, or chicken drumsticks on other people's trays, and even more afraid of others seeing the poverty on mine. That kind of low self-esteem didn't form in a day or two. It started back in my freshman year of high school, when the class monitor collected document fees. Out of 50 people in the class, 49 took the money out on the spot, and only I said I would bring it tomorrow. Then came the second day, the third day, the fourth day, until the class monitor stopped asking me, and I crossed my own name off the list. It was also during the winter, when everyone else wore down jackets, while I wore a jacket my mom had altered from an old cotton padded coat, with the cuffs a section too short, exposing my wrists. My desk mate asked, "Aren't you cold?" I said, "I'm not cold," and then pulled my hands back into my sleeves, not taking them out for the entire class period. Whenever the teacher asked us to fill out the family background form, when I wrote the words loss of work in the father's occupation column, the tip of my pen would pierce the paper. I thought my entire youth would go on, being this gloomy and dim, until the appearance of Ling Wan. He was a top student in the class, a regular fixture in the top 10 of the grade, with a well-off family background. His father opened an auto repair shop in the county town, and his mother was an elementary school teacher. He wasn't strikingly handsome, but his facial features were clean, and when he smiled, there were 2 shallow dimples at the corners of his mouth. He was the kind of a girl who made everyone feel at ease just by looking at her. The whole grade knew him, not because he was extremely pretty, but because there was a certain glow about him. Wherever he went, it was bright, not blinding, but warm. I never thought I would have any intersection with him. We were people from two different worlds. He was in the front row, while I was in the corner against the wall in the back row. During breaks, he was surrounded by people asking all sorts of questions, while I slumped over my desk alone, pretending to sleep. When school let out, cars would pick me up at the school gate. No, I walked 40 minutes back to the flat in the suburbs by myself. That noon was no different from any other. Zhao Jio, was carrying my vegetable dish and rice, huddled in the very corner of the cafeteria, facing the wall, and turning my back to everyone. I set my enamel mug down on my knees, picked up a piece of stir-fried cabbage that had turned yellowish with my chopsticks, and shoved it into my mouth. Then I heard the sound of a food tray being placed on the table, right beside me. I froze. Turning my head, Ling Wan was just setting his tray down, then sat down as naturally as anyone else, just like sitting across from any ordinary classmate. On his tray were sweet and sour ribs, a serving of braised pork, shredded potatoes, and a bowl of seaweed and egg drop soup. He didn't look at me, picked up his chopsticks, and picked out a green vegetable from my tray, just casually grabbing it like that, put it in his mouth, and chewed. I ate one of your greens. Consider this payback. Don't turn your nose up at it. He took the sweet and sour ribs and braised pork from his tray and added all of them to mine. 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces of sweet and sour ribs coated in a reddish-brown sauce, nestled on top of the white rice, seeping out dark stains. The braised pork was cut into neat little square pieces, fat and lean alternating, quivering slightly and exuding the fragrance of oil and soy sauce. At that exact moment, the sunlight just happened to stream through the cafeteria window, landing on his face. His dimples were shallow. There was light in his eyes, and it shone so brightly that my gloomy youth suddenly gained warmth. I kept my head down, staring fixedly at those few pieces of meat on my tray. Tears were swirling in my eye sockets, about to drop right into the soup. I fought desperately to hold them back, my Adam's apple bobbing up and down, forcibly swallowing that bitter, sour lump right back down. Growing up to this point, never had anyone ever guarded my self-esteem with such careful caution. No one had ever been like him, hiding gentleness in such casual actions, not asking a single question like, "Is your family very poor?" or saying, "I'll treat you." He just picked away a green vegetable and then pushed the meat over as if it were only natural, as if this were a fair trade. Those 2 pieces of sweet and sour ribs, that 1 piece of braised pork, that single green vegetable that was taken away, and those words became my only obsession in this life. That night when I got back home, I lay down on my own wooden plank bed that creaked with every movement, staring at the mottled water stains on the ceiling, replaying the scene in the cafeteria over and over again. His smile, the motion of his chopsticks taking away the green vegetable, the casual tone in his voice when he spoke. I had to test into the best university. I had to make something of myself. I had to stand upright and tall in front of him one day, so I would never have to hide in a corner eating vegetable dishes again, and never have to live such a humble, lowly life again. From then on, I crammed problems day and night. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, arrived at the classroom by 6, and after lights out at 11 at night, I would huddle under the covers with a flashlight, continuing to do practice tests. Math, science, English, one workbook after another. When a pen refill ran out of ink, I couldn't bear to throw it away. I would scribble on scrap paper until it stopped producing any color at all before changing to a new one. I bottled up all my emotions deep inside my heart and gave up all entertainment, giving up all forms of entertainment. During breaks, classmates discussed TV shows and chatted about gossip, or arranged to go to the internet cafe over the weekend. I slumped over my desk, with old MP3 earphones dug up from the secondhand market stuck in my ears. Inside, there was only English listening practice, I didn't dare say another extra word to Ling Wan. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that I didn't dare. I was afraid my shabby predicament wouldn't match his perfection. Afraid that saying one more word would expose my lowliness, my poverty, and my wretchedness. I was afraid he would realize that I couldn't even afford a decent set of review materials. Afraid he would know that after every evening self-study session, I still had to go to the school. Backgate's trash can pick up plastic bottles and say them up to sell for money. I could only put all my thoughts into my studies, drowning myself in a sea of test questions and proving myself with scores. During the mock exams in the second semester of senior year, I ranked third in the grade. Head teacher Li Jiangguo called me into the office, shut the door, and sat behind the desk. Xinyu, you did pretty well on this exam. I just want to say something sincere to you. I understand your family situation. Your dad is at the construction site. Your mom is at the vegetable market. And your sister's health is poor. Even if you do well on the Gaokao, can your family afford the university tuition and living expenses? I suggest you apply for a normal university within the province. The tuition is low and there are subsidies. And after graduation, you'll be assigned back to teach in our county, which is steady and secure. Don't reach too high or go chasing after some 985 or 211 school. Even if you get in, you can't afford to attend. I didn't retort, didn't say I could pass the exam, didn't say I could afford it, and didn't say anything at all. I just stood there in silence for 3 seconds, then turned around and walked out of the office. The hallway was empty, and the afternoon sunlight shone in through the windows, casting bright patches of light on the ground. I walked to the stairwell, squatted down, and buried my face in my knees. I didn't cry. I just squatted there for a long time. That night when I got back home, Mom was washing vegetables in the courtyard. The water flowing from the faucet was bone-chillingly cold, and her hands were soaked red, the knuckles thick and chapped. Dad was squatting on the threshold, smoking a cigarette. The cigarette, but being a half-smoked remnant someone else had thrown away. He picked it back up, unraveled it, and re-rolled the tobacco shreds into a strip of paper. My sister was sitting on a small stool inside the house doing homework, coughing every now and then, making a wheezing sound like a bellows from the back of her throat. You're back. Have you eaten?
Ma,
There's porridge in the pot. I want to take the exam for Shanghai Jiaotong University. Take it then. If you get in, even if we have to smash our pots and sell our iron, we'll support you. Tomorrow I'll take a trip to your second uncle's place. And see if we can borrow some. Back inside the room. I switched on the desk lamp and opened up a practice booklet. At the corner of the desk was a slip of paper I had written myself. The handwriting sloppy but forceful. 628 points. Shanghai Jiaotong University. That was the score cut off for the previous year's senior students to get into Jiaotong. I wrote this number down on a piece of paper and pasted it right in front of my eyes so I could see it the moment I raised my head every day. Cramming problems and memorizing books, doing questions and reciting texts. The days were compressed into a 2-point line. The classroom and home. Sleep was compressed into 4 hours, and meals were compressed into 5 minutes. 1 week before the Gaokao, the school gave us study leave. I locked myself in that flat that was sweltering in the summer and bitterly cold in the winter. The desk was piled high with test papers and reference books. Mom didn't dare to disturb me. She would bring the food to the door, knock lightly, and walk away. When my sister coughed, She would cover her mouth and scurry out into the courtyard to cough. During those 2 days of exams, the weather in the county town was gloomy and overcast, as muggy and humid as a steamer cage, stuffily hot like a steamer. I sat in the exam room, my palms soaked with sweat, the pen barrel slippery. The composition topic for the first exam, Chinese, was record. I wrote about a young man walking out from the mud and mire. Halfway through writing, I remembered the sunlight in the corner of the cafeteria, and those 2 pieces of sweet and sour ribs. The tip of my pen paused, blurring the ink into a small dot. When the final exam ending bell rang, the moment I walked out of the examination hall, I didn't cheer or feel a sense of relief. I simply clutched the wrinkled admission ticket in my pocket tightly, raised my head to glance at the gray, overcast sky, and then walked alone through the crowd, following the base of the wall back to the suburbs. On the night the scores were announced, I borrowed a computer from a neighbor. The mobile phone signal was poor, and after refreshing several times, I still couldn't get into the score-checking page. I squatted in the courtyard, my fingers trembling as I entered my admission ticket number. The circle on the screen spun for over 10 seconds, and then a number popped up, 628 points. I stared at that number for a very long time, and then squatted right there in our dilapidated family courtyard, crying for a full half hour. It wasn't a wailing, loud cry, but the kind of crying where emotions had been suppressed for too long and finally broke the dam. My shoulders shook violently, and a broken sob came from my throat. Big tears splashed down onto the ground, leaving dark marks. Mom rushed out from the house, startled, thinking I hadn't passed the exam. I handed her the phone to look at. She stared at it for a long time, then covered her face and cried as well. Dad stood at the doorway without coming over, just turning his back to us, his shoulders twitching once. On the day the admission notice from Shanghai Jiaotong University arrived, the entire county town was in an uproar. I was the first student from this county high school in over a dozen years to be admitted to this university. Head teacher Li Jianguo stood on the podium, holding up that admission notice, with a radiant smile beaming across his face, and said to the whole class, "Everyone should learn from classmate Chinyu, a humble family producing a noble son. This is the best role model." I looked at his smiling face from my seat and said nothing. Our family couldn't scrape together the tuition fees, so the village committee helped apply for a student loan, while also mobilizing the villagers to donate a little. Mom sold the 2 hens she had raised for over half a year. Dad's jujube tree in the courtyard, which had grown for more than a decade, was cut down, and its stump was sold to a timber buyer. By scraping together every bit we could, we finally managed to pull together the tuition and travel expenses for the first semester. On the day I left, Mom stuffed into my old canvas bag 20 boiled eggs, along with a jar of pickled vegetables, and a bag of dried steam buns. Dad didn't see me off, saying there was work at the construction site, and left early in the morning. I knew it wasn't that he didn't want to see me off. It was that he was afraid he wouldn't be able to bear the parting. My sister hugged my waist and cried for a while, almost triggering her asthma. Mom hurriedly pulled her away, with my simple luggage on my back. Clutching the meager living expenses of just a few hundred yuan, I boarded the long-distance bus heading to Shanghai, then transferred to a train. It was a hard seat on a slow greenskin train for 23 hours. The carriage was crowded and stuffy, mixed with the smell of instant noodles, sweat, and cigarette smoke. I leaned against the train window, watching the scenery rushing backward outside. Famnon village, low houses, and rolling hills being left behind bit by bit. The moment the train started moving, there was only one thought in my mind. Chunyu, you have to succeed. Not for anything else, but for that girl in senior year, who shared those 2 pieces of ribs with you. For that gentleness that wasn't looked down upon, and so that one day in the future you could stand before her, without lowering your head, and without dodging away anymore, and never feeling inferior again. I didn't turn back, and I deliberately skipped over all memories related to my youth. After starting university, I didn't contact Ling Wan. I knew that he had also tested into East China Normal University in Shanghai, just a few subway stops away from Jiaotong. Someone at a hometown gathering had mentioned his name, and I held my wine glass tightly, my fingers tightening, with no expression whatsoever on my face. I didn't go look for him. It wasn't that I didn't miss him. It was that I didn't dare. I knew my situation far too well. Just a poor student, whose tuition relied on loans, and whose living expenses relied on part-time jobs, unable to even afford treating him to a decent meal. Rather than letting him see my hardship once again, it was better to wait until I had truly found my footing, until I had the qualification to stand by his side, before going to find him. During my 4 years of university, I never got a full night's sleep. I attended classes during the day, and went to part-time jobs at night, handing out flyers, standing at the subway entrance, stuffing those colorful advertising papers into the hands of hurried passers-by, getting pushed away, getting ignored, and having flyers thrown directly into the trash can right in front of my face. I worked as a tutor, riding a battered bicycle, bought from a senior who had just graduated, crossing more than half of Shanghai, to tutor math and physics for the children of wealthy families. The living room of that family was bigger than my entire rented apartment. The crystal chandelier shining so brightly it hurt the eyes. And the child's mother sat nearby, peeling an apple, eating it herself afterward, without ever pouring me a single cup of water. I hauled boxes in the logistics park, working from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. The boxes were terribly heavy, pressing down on my shoulders, making the bones in my spine creak. When I finished work at dawn, I was drenched from head to toe, unable to tell whether it was sweat or the dew that had condensed during the night. Later on, I learned how to write code, taking on freelance projects, and helping small companies build websites and write programs. The dormitory internet was cut off at 11 p.m., so I would take my laptop to the 24-hour convenience store at the school entrance, buy a bottle of the cheapest mineral water, sit on the high stool by the window, borrow the convenience store's Wi-Fi, and bang out code until dawn. The clerk was a girl with a ponytail, who, when working the night shift, would secretly give me an extra paper cup for Odin, and let me fill it with hot water to drink. I never made a single friend, or was in a romantic relationship once. There were only 2 words in my heart: success. While others enjoyed the freedom and romance of college, club activities, dating, traveling, and group dinners, I struggled and scraped by in a city of steel and concrete. While others ate, drank, played, and squandered their youth, I hurried back and forth between the library and part-time workplaces, converting every single minute into money. My eyes and heart filled entirely with my future way out, and that first love hidden deep in my heart. I knew that only if I became strong enough could I match that youthful gentleness and give him a stable future. In the winter of my senior year, Shanghai saw a rare snowfall. I stood at the convenience store entrance, watching snowflakes drift down from beneath the dim, yellow streetlights, and instantly melt into a puddle of water on the road. In my hand, I clutched the 3,000 yuan I had just earned from finishing a project, and my bank account balance finally broke into 5 digits. I raised my head to look at the grayish-white sky, the snowflakes feeling ice-cold as they landed on my face, and silently said 2 words to the empty air. In the year I graduated from university, I turned down an offer from a major tech giant, not because I didn't want it, but because I couldn't take it. A big company meant stability, meant a step-by-step promotional path, and meant a fixed monthly salary, year-end bonuses, and social insurance benefits. But it also meant that I would forever only be a tiny gear in a machine, and it meant that I would never keep up with the rate at which housing prices rose, which meant I could never give someone else a future where they didn't have to lower their head. So I took the tens of thousands of yuan I had saved from my part-time jobs, withdrew every last cent of it, and combined it with a little savings I scraped together from freelance gigs during college, along with a few friends I met on technology forums. And we registered a company together. Calling it a company was actually just a basement in an old, dilapidated residential building in the suburbs of Shanghai. It was a dozen square meters or so, sweltering in the summer like a steamer basket, with no air conditioning. Only a floor fan dug up from the second-hand market, humming along as it spun, blowing out nothing but hot air. The winters were bitterly cold and biting, and the heating pipes were in disrepair. The few of us wrapped ourselves in military overcoats, our fingers typing on the keyboards in front of our computers, frozen stiff, having to stop every few strokes to rub our hands together. We ate instant noodles, and not on steamed buns. The instant noodles were the cheapest kind, costing a few cents a pack. We would tear open the seasoning packet, dump it into an enamel mug, pour boiling water over it, and that was a meal. The steamed buns were bought from the vegetable market, costing 50 cents each, and after sitting for 2 days, they were as hard as rocks. So we broke them apart and soaked them in the instant noodle soup, just to barely manage to swallow them down. We only slept 3 or 4 hours a day, modifying code, revising plans, running business errands, and negotiating partnerships. The first time I went to negotiate a partnership, I wore a shirt I had bought back in college, the button at the cuff having fallen off. So I pinned it together with a stapler. The client was a small company dealing in building materials. The boss, whose surname was Zhou, was in his 40s with a thick gold chain hanging around his neck, sitting in a leather chair with his legs crossed. Flipping through the proposal, I handed up, before throwing it back onto the table. Is this it? I've seen too many of you fresh university graduates. You think too highly of yourselves. Talk a good game, and produce a pile of crap. I stood in front of his office desk, my fingers tightening at my sides. Director Zhou, please give me a chance. I'll do the first version for you for free. If you're not satisfied, you don't have to pay a single penny. Boss Zhou stared at me for a few seconds, then scoffed derisively. Fine, let's see if you're up for it. We could try since it costs no money anyway. I bowed, then turned around and walked out of the office. In the hallway, I ground my back molars together until they creaked. For that business deal, I pulled 3 consecutive all-nighters, revising the proposal 7 times, starting completely over from scratch with every single version. On the 4th morning, I sent the final version over, and then slumped over the computer and fell asleep. 2 hours later, I was woken up on my phone vibrating. Boss Zhou sent a text message, consisting of only 2 words, approved. When the first payment arrived in our account, the few of us squatted down in the basement, looking at the bank account balance, and nobody said a word. Deducting the rent, utilities, and equipment installment payments from the 8,000 yuan, less than 3,000 was left. But that was the first time we had ever earned money through our own skills. The hardest time was during the 8th month after the company was established. We took on a large project, receiving a 30% advance payment, with the remaining 70% to be paid only after delivery and acceptance inspection. The few of us worked day and night for 2 months, and finally put the system together. The tests passed, and we prepared for delivery. Then my business partner, Zhang Lei, found me. Zhang Lei was the technical partner. Half of the core code was written by him. We had met on a technical forum, and because we hit it off, he quit his job in Hangzhou and ran over to Shanghai to start a business with me. I had always regarded him as a brother. That night, he called me over to the stairwell outside the basement, handed me a cigarette, and said, "Chen Yu, I have something to tell you." I took the cigarette without lighting it. He took a puff and inhaled, the smoke dispersing under the street lamp. Mingchuang's people approached me. making an offer for me to bring the core code over. The salary is this much. He gestured with a number, plus giving me 5 in equity. I looked at him and said nothing. Ming Chuang was our biggest competitor, founded 2 years earlier than us, and having already secured Series A financing, making quite a name for itself in the Shanghai internet circle. Their purpose in poaching Zhang Lei was very clear. They wanted to get their hands on our core code and make our newly emerged little company go under straight away. So I asked Zhang Lei, what are your thoughts? Zhang Lei flicked his cigarette ash, not looking at me. Xinyu, we've known each other for nearly 2 years. I treat you as a brother. But brotherhood is brotherhood. A guy still has to live. My parents back home are still paying off a mortgage, and I need to start a family myself. I can't refuse the terms Ming Chuang is offering. He paused. And to be honest, once our current project is delivered, that's about it. We don't even know where the next order is coming from. Instead of dragging it out here, whenever you decide to leave, I cut him off. Zhang Lei fell silent for a few seconds. Then what about the code? He didn't answer me, turning around instead, to look at the basement's narrow little window from which a dim, yellowish light was leaking out. The other 2 partners were still inside, tapping away at their code. The clatter of keyboards, mixed with the humming sound of the fan rotating. Zhang Lei, I called out his name, my voice very calm. It's true that you wrote the core code, but I built the architecture, and I designed the underlying logic. Every single interface, and the coupling method for every module was determined by me. You can take the code with you, but I guarantee you, once you get to Ming Chuang, within 3 months, you won't be able to write a single line of usable new code. Zhang Lei's expression changed, not because my words were harsh, but because he knew I was telling the truth. The core design concepts of that architecture were all inside my head. Without me, that pile of code was just a bunch of soulless building blocks. They could be put together, but they couldn't be modified, couldn't be expanded, and would be phased out before long. He asked me, what do you want? I said, leave the code behind. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. He stared at me, the cigarette burning down a long way between his fingertips, the ash forgotten and unflicked. What if I don't leave it behind? I didn't answer that question, simply reaching my hand into my pocket, pulling out my phone, and tapping on a recording file. Inside was the recording of our meeting from 3 weeks ago, where Zhang Lei proposed during the meeting that the core code should be backed up separately onto his private server, under the pretext of security considerations. I hadn't objected at the time, just silently pressed the record button. Zhang Lei's face went completely pale. You were guarding against me? I wasn't guarding against you. I've just learned to always leave myself a backup plan. Back when I was eating vegetable dishes in the cafeteria corner, I already learned that the only person in this world you can truly rely on is yourself. Zhang Lei left. Early the next morning, he packed his things and left the basement without saying goodbye to anyone. When the other 2 partners found out, they fell silent for a long time. And then one of them stood up, went to the kitchen to boil a pot of water, and brewed a bowl of instant noodles for each of us. He said, eat. Once we're done eating, we keep working. That bowl of instant noodles was the saltiest one I had ever eaten in my life. I didn't know if too much seasoning packet had been added, or if my tears had fallen into it. That night, I walked out of the basement alone. I climbed up along the old staircase. The voice-activated light in the stairwell broken, leaving everything pitch black, with only the faint glow of my phone screen illuminating the steps. I climbed to the top floor, pushed open the rusted iron door, and walked out onto the rooftop. Shanghai's night was dazzlingly prosperous. In the distance were the skyscrapers of Lujiazui, their lights dense and numerous, like the entire Milky Way had been plucked down and embedded along the banks of the Huangpu River. The spire of the Oriental Pearl Tower glittered in the night sky, and the roof of the Shanghai World Financial Center vanished into the clouds. Tall buildings stood in forests, their lights brilliantly bright. The entire city, looking like a giant, unceasing machine, inhaling and exhaling the dreams and despairs of countless people. Not a single light was lit for me. I stood at the edge of the rooftop, the wind very strong, making my shirt snap loudly. I pulled out my phone and flipped to a photo, a digital snapshot of the graduation photo from senior year of high school. The pixels were blurry, and in the photo, Ling Wan stood in the fourth position from the left in the second row, wearing a blue and white school uniform, and smiling toward the camera, her dimples shallow, light in her eyes. I stared at that photo for a long time, then spoke in a low voice to the empty air, Li Wan. I almost couldn't hold on today. A brother betrayed me and took away half of my life's work. The money in the company's account is only enough to last until next month. I don't know if, after this project is delivered, we'll even be able to land the next order. I paused for a moment, but I won't give up. I looked at the distant spire of the Oriental Pearl Tower, its lights flickering uncertainly in the night view. You know what? Every single day, all these years, I've thought about how once I succeed, and once I'm qualified, I'll go find you. I'll treat you to dinner at the finest restaurant, buy you the prettiest clothes, and take you to see all the scenery you want to see, making sure you never have to suffer any grievances again, and never have to carefully guard anyone's self-esteem, because that poor kid you once protected, he's going to become very strong, strong enough to protect you. The sound of the wind howled across the rooftop. I put away my phone, turned around, and walked back down the pitch-black stairs into the basement. Pushing open the door, the two partners were still tapping away at their code, the fan humming as it spun, the instant noodles in the enamel mugs already swollen and mushy. I sat down at my own workstation, opened my computer, and continued. That year, the company almost died 3 times. The first time was after Zhonglei left. Ming Chuang used the information obtained from Zhonglei to launch a product with highly similar features. 1 week before a delivery, seizing the market in advance, the client called over to question us. Their tone filled entirely with anger and disappointment. I flew overnight, sat in the client company's conference room, opened my computer, and explained our architectural differences line by line of code, proving that our underlying design was far more flexible and expandable than Ming Chuang's. The client finally nodded and renewed the contract. The second time was a capital chain rupture. The project payment collection cycle was drawn out too long, and the money in the account hit rock bottom, unable to pay salaries. I took all the savings I had accumulated over my 4 years of university, poured every last cent into it, maxed out my credit cards again, and borrowed from everyone I possibly could. At my poorest, I only had a few dozen yuan left on me, unable to even afford instant noodles. I sat on the steps outside the basement entrance, watching the delivery e-bikes come and go, my stomach aching from hunger. The third time was a technical breakthrough. We had taken on the management system development for a large enterprise. The project amount was huge, but the technical difficulty far exceeded expectations. For 40 consecutive days, everyone on the team ate, lived, and slept in the office, setting up folding cots right next to their workstations. When exhausted, they would lie down to sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and when awake, they would get right back to work. I lost 15 pounds. My eye sockets were sunken, and stubble covered my chin. On the day of delivery, the system ran smoothly, without a single bug. The client's technical director stood up, extended his hand to me, and said one sentence. "You guys are the most reliable team I've ever worked with." Afterward, relying on an unyielding stubbornness and top-notch technical skill combined with precise market judgment, the company slowly began to look up, growing from a small team of a few people to dozens, and then to hundreds, moving out of the basement, and into a high-end office building in the tech park. On the day we moved, I stood in that dark, damp basement, taking one last look around. The instant noodle box in the corner hadn't been thrown away yet, and that floor fan had a crooked head, looking as if it were saying goodbye to us. I placed the keys on the desk, closed the door, and didn't look back. From the verge of bankruptcy to securing our first round of financing. My investor's surname was Fong, a woman in her early 40s, with short hair and a sharp gaze. After listening to my pitch, she folded her folder and asked me a question. Chunyu, what is the driving force behind your startup? I was silent for a few seconds. For a person. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. I didn't go on, and she didn't press further, simply signing the term sheet and then handing the pen to me. I'm not investing in your project. I'm investing in you. There's something in your eyes that I rarely see in other entrepreneurs. It's obsession. Later, when the company went public, its market value soared all the way. On the day of the bell ringing, the hall of the Shanghai Stock Exchange was packed with people, flashbulbs clattering, everyone dressed in suits and ties, with beaming smiles. I stood on the stage, holding the bell-striking mallet facing the cameras, with a perfectly measured smile on my face. The moment the bell rang, I silently recited a name in my heart, Ling Wan. From a penniless student with nothing, to a business legend in the eyes of others. It took me a full 10 years. The name Chinyu was known to everyone in Shanghai's business circles. I had my own tech group, venturing into the internet, new energy, and high-end services, with luxury homes and luxury cars under my name, possessing countless assets, surrounded by all sorts of people, offering flattery, fawning, and buttering me up in every possible way. I no longer had to eat plain vegetable dishes, nor did I ever have to worry about money again. Frequenting high-end clubs and eating the top-tier cuisine, the chef of a Michelin-starred restaurant would personally come out to greet me, recommending the daily signature dishes of Wagyu beef, truffles, and caviar, and the presentation as exquisite as a work of art, melting the moment it touched the tongue. Yet I never tasted again the flavor of those two sweet and sour pork ribs from back then. After achieving success and renown, I sent people to look for Ling Wan, wanting to know how he had been all these years, and wanting to fulfill the promise of our youth. But the news brought back by the people I sent out was intermittent and fragmented, unable to piece together a complete outline. I only knew that after graduating from university, he didn't stay in Shanghai, but returned to his hometown. Later, his family ran into trouble. His father's business failed and accumulated debts, though the exact amount wasn't clear. After that, he quit his job, moved away, and changed his phone number, vanishing completely like a drop of water falling into a river, leaving no trace of news whatsoever. I sat in my office listening to the report, silent for a very long time. Outside the window, Shanghai's lights were just turning on, amid a bustling stream of traffic. I gripped my phone, flipped to that blurry graduation photo, and looked at it for a long time. Then I locked the screen and placed my phone face down on the desk, my heart feeling completely hollow. The obsession of more than 10 years seemed to have suddenly lost its destination. I had truly believed that for the rest of my life, I would never lay eyes on that girl who illuminated my youth, ever again. So I poured all my energy into my career, becoming a workaholic in the eyes of others, indifferent to women, cold and tight-lipped. At business banquets, business partners chatted and laughed with their female companions, subtle undertones of romance swirling amidst the toasts. I held my wine glass with an expressionless face like an outsider. Everyone around me urged me to settle down and start a family. President Fong, that same investor who backed me back then, later became my shareholder and half-mentor. Once while we were drinking coffee, she looked at me and sighed, "Chunyu, you're 31 this year. The company has gone public, and you've made your fortune. It's time to start considering things for yourself. I stirred my coffee and said nothing. President Fong asked again, "Is there someone already in your heart?" As soon as those words were uttered, my coffee spoon tapped against the cup, making a faint, clear sound. President Fong nodded knowingly and didn't ask any further. The businesses under my banner grew larger and larger, among which were included several top-tier nightclubs and clubs in Shanghai. Wuyue Club was the most high-end of them all, situated in a standalone Western-style mansion near the Bund, with luxurious decorations and dim, mesmerizing lighting. The security guards at the entrance wore exquisitely tailored black suits and earpieces, smiling and nodding to every guest entering and exiting. Normally, I rarely went to such places, only holding the controlling stake as an investor and leaving them to be managed by the professional team under me. I always felt that this kind of dazzling, decadent place was far too flashy and completely out of tune with the purity deep within my heart. Yet I never expected that fate's arrangement would be so cruel, yet so coincidental. I would actually cross paths in a place like this, with the first love I had missed for over a decade. That night, a business partner insisted on going to Wuyue Club to discuss a partnership. The other party's surname was Wu, named Wu Qiming, and he was the vice president of a large real estate group. In his early 50s, with his hair combed meticulously without a single strand out of place. He wore a gold watch on his wrist. Our group, and theirs, had a 9-figure partnership on the line. With the project under negotiation, he had flown all the way from Shenzhen specifically to invite me out 3 times. I turned him down the first 2 times, but the third time President Fong made a personal phone call. Wu Qiming is someone who cares deeply about saving face. You've already rebuffed him twice, and that's enough. If you turn him down again, the project will fall through. I was silent for 2 seconds. He chose the location. Wuyue Club. I frowned. Changed to a different place. He specifically requested it. President Fong's voice came from the other end of the phone, carrying a trace of helplessness. He said he went there once before, and thought the environment was pretty good. Chinyu, I know you don't like those kinds of settings, but in the business world, sometimes you have to know when to bend. I hung up the phone. At 8 p.m., my chauffeur pulled the car up to the entrance of Wuyue Club. I pushed open the car door, and the greeter at the entrance recognized me immediately, bowing deeply to pull open the main doors. President Chun. President Wu has already arrived in the Imperial Private Room on the 2nd floor. I walked expressionlessly through the lobby and walked up the spiral staircase to the 2nd floor. The door to the Imperial Private Room was a heavy, custom-made wooden door with 2 men in black suits standing at the entrance. Seeing me approach, they simultaneously bowed their heads and pushed the door open for me. The private room was massive, measuring easily 70 or 80 square meters. Right in the center was a dark solid wood long table, upon which were placed fruit platters, alcoholic beverages, and several plates of exquisite cold appetizers. The sofas were made of dark red, genuine leather, wide and soft, and the lighting was adjusted to be very dim, with only a few ambient lights on the tabletop, and concealed strip lighting embedded within the walls lit up. The entire room was enveloped in a lazy, seductive atmosphere. Wu Qiming had already arrived, sitting on the sofa next to the main seat, surrounded by 2 vice presidents he had brought with him, and a female secretary. Seeing me walk in, he stood up, his face piled with smiles, and waved toward me. "President Chun, you finally arrived. Come, sit down quickly, sit down quickly." I walked over and shook hands with him briefly, then sat down in the main seat. Wu Qiming personally poured me a glass of whiskey, the ice cubes striking the glass walls, and producing a rattling sound. "President Chun, this place is truly wonderful. Ever since I came here once before, I've kept thinking about it." He leaned in closer and lowered his voice. carrying a certain tacit, knowing smile. I heard this establishment is under your holding company. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip, indifferent and calm. Incredible, truly incredible. For President Chun to have such a sprawling business empire at such a young age. I genuinely admire you. Wu Qiming picked up his wine glass and clinked it against mine. Let's start with a toast. I tilted my head back and finished it in one gulp. The whiskey sliding down my throat, spicy and burning hot. Wu Qiming poured me another one, then leaned back against the sofa, crossed his legs, and glanced around the private room, before saying, with a pointed tone, President Chun, just drinking is a bit dull. How about we call a few young women in a chat, and keep us company? I've certainly heard of the women here at Buyue Club. Every single one of them is. I cut him off, saying no need. Wu Qiming was stunned for a moment, then smiled and waved his hand. President Chun is still just as serious. No wonder everyone in the circle says that the people wanting to introduce matches to President Chun could line up all the way to the banks of the Huangpu River. Yet President Chun doesn't take a fancy to a single one. One of the vice presidents beside him chimed in, his tone carrying a mix of probing and flattery. President Chun hasn't even had a female companion by his side all these years. Could it be that sister-in-law is hidden away at home and not allowed to be seen? The private room fell silent for a split second. I pinched my wine glass and didn't raise my head. Haven't met anyone worth it. The voice was cold and detached, like a blade sliding across an icy surface. Wu Qiming and the vice president exchanged a glance, wisely choosing not to ask any further. Yet Wu Qiming clearly wasn't going to give up. He poured me another half glass of wine, and then raised his hand to press the service button on the table. In less than a minute, the door opened and the head waitress walked in, a woman in her 30s, wearing a black professional suit skirt, her hair pinned up meticulously, and her makeup exquisite. Following behind her were 5 or 6 young women, walking into the private room one after another, and standing in a row in front of the long table. They wore dresses of various colors, the hemlines reaching the floor or the knees, revealing fair shoulders and collarbones. I originally intended to stand up and leave, but right at that moment, the private room door was pushed open once more, and a girl wearing a light purple dress followed behind the waitress, walking in with hurried footsteps. She must have been late, her breathing somewhat unsteady. When entering, her high heel twisted slightly, almost causing her to fall. She steadied herself by grabbing the doorframe, and then, keeping her head down, she walked quickly over to the end of the line of women and stood straight. She kept her head lowered, not daring to look at anyone, her hands tightly gripping her dress hem, her fingers turning pale. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. I raised my eyes to look, and my heart gave a violent contraction. It was Ling Wan. It really was him. Having not seen each other for more than a decade, he had changed a lot. Yet it also seemed as though he hadn't changed at all. His features and eyes were still the same as back then, yet his face was caked with heavy, striking makeup, the foundation masking his original skin tone, and his eyeliner drawn out very long. Her lips were painted a bright, striking red, and though her makeup was exquisite, it couldn't conceal the deep-seated exhaustion lurking in the depths of her eyes, along with a cautious, almost humiliatingly timid wariness. She stood at the end of the line of young women, like a shadow ready to be overlooked at any moment. The waitress began introducing their names from left to right, along with their specialties and personalities. The 2 vice presidents brought by Wu Qiming had already begun sizing up the women before them, whispering and exchanging words with one another. When it came to the very last introduction, the waitress's voice rang out, "This is Wan Wan. She's a newcomer, quiet by nature, and can pour drinks and sing. Wan Wan." So he didn't even dare to use his own real name anymore. My chest felt as though we're being tightly gripped by a massive hand. all my internal organs pressing inward together, hurting so much I couldn't catch my breath. Over a decade of yearning, obsession, and anticipation completely collapsed in this single moment and crushed into fragments by an even more intense, more primitive emotion. Heartache, anger, and an indescribable, nameless feeling that almost burst my chest wide open. The first love I had yearned for over a decade. The girl I had tried with all my might to protect. The one I had spoken to the empty air about on the rooftop in the dead of night. The person waiting for me. She actually appeared in a place like this, doing this kind of work. Wu Qiming was holding his wine glass and sizing up that row of women, his gaze sweeping back and forth among them. Before noticing my line of sight, my gaze remained locked on a Ling Wan without moving an inch. Wu Qiming looked over following my gaze, and then smiled. President Shun, since you've taken a fancy to this young lady, why don't you have her accompany you exclusively? He raised his hand to point at Ling Wan, then beckoned to her. Wan, come here, and pour President Shun a drink. Ling Wan's body shuddered, and he slowly raised his head, his eyes colliding with mine by accident. In that exact instant, all the color on his face seemed to be violently drained away by a hand, leaving a ghastly, bone-deep, almost transparent pallor. He recognized me. The emotions surging up within his eyes were like a silent tsunami. Shock, panic, shame, helplessness, and a kind of despair. After having all his disguises stripped bare in public, his pupils contracted violently, and his eye sockets instantly welled up with tears, glittering painfully under the lights. His body instinctively took a step back, his high heel stepping on the hem of his dress, causing him to sway and nearly fall. He reached out a hand to steady himself against the wall, his fingers fully curled, his fingernails scraping against the wallpaper with a faint sound. I watched as his tears swirled in his eye sockets, yet he desperately held them back from falling, his lips pressed into a straight line, his chin trembling slightly, swallowing down into his throat something that was almost about to slip out as a voice. That awkwardness, that lowliness, that helplessness of wishing he could vanish right on the spot, felt like a blade, stabbing into my heart over and over again. That sunny, cheerful girl from back then, the girl with starlight in her eyes, the girl who picked away a piece of green vegetable and pushed the sweet and sour pork ribs over, the girl who smiled and said, "Take this as compensation, don't mind it." How could she have become like this? Everyone else in the private room also noticed the anomaly. Wu Qiming put down his wine glass and looked at me, then looked back at Ling Wan, the smile on his face turning subtle. The two vice presidents looked at each other in bewilderment, and the row of women also raised their heads to look over curiously. The air froze for a few seconds, suppressing the raging turmoil in the depths of my heart. I pulled my gaze away from Ling Wan's face, then braced myself against the sofa armrest and stood up, my expression as cold as ice. "You guys chat amongst yourselves. I'm going out for some fresh air." Wu Qiming hurriedly stood up. "President Shun, I didn't look at him," and walked straight toward the door, my footsteps somewhat unsteady. As I passed by Ling Wan, his shoulder trembled violently, and his whole body shrank back against the wall, as if afraid that I might touch him. I didn't stop, pushing open the door and stepping into the hallway. The heavy door closed behind me, shutting out the music and voices from inside the private room. The hallway was much quieter, the light from the wall sconces dim and soft, shining down on the dark carpeting. Further down was a window, beyond which lay the night view of the Bund. The skyscrapers across the Huangpu River, brilliantly lit up. I leaned against the hallway wall, fumbled a cigarette case out from my pocket, pulled one out, and put it between my lips. It took 3 clicks of the lighter to get it lit, the flame dancing at my fingertips, making the veins on the back of my hand stand out even more clearly. I took a deep drag, the smoke surging into my lungs, spicy and burning hot, and then slowly exhaled. The smoke diffused within the warm glow of the wall lamp, blurring my vision. My hand was shaking badly, and amidst the swirling smoke was nothing but how Ling Wan looked just moments ago. The look in his eyes the instant he raised his head, the tears swirling in his eye sockets, yet desperately held back from falling. His unsteady sway almost causing him to fall as he backed away, and his fingernails gripping his dress hem until they turned white. Wan. He didn't even dare use his own name anymore. I closed my eyes, smoke pouring out from my nasal cavity. Seeing me leaning against the wall, smoking. His footsteps paused for a second. He muttered President Chun, and then quickened his pace to leave. I reached out and grabbed his wrist in one motion. It was very thin, through the thin fabric of his dress sleeve. His wrist bones pressed against my palm, ice cold, and so emaciated there was nothing left but bone, with a delicate pulse beneath the skin, beating rapidly and erratically, like a bird trapped inside the palm of a hand. He stopped dead in his tracks, freezing on the spot, as if struck by lightning. I could feel his trembling starting from his wrist, spreading up his forearm, elbow, and shoulder to his entire body. That light purple dress was as thin as a sheet of paper, lying between us, and hiding nothing at all. He didn't look back, burying his head even lower, his chin nearly pressing against his collarbone, a few strands of his pinned-up hair coming loose, and resting against his neck, swaying slightly. In the draft blowing through the hallway, a tear finally fell, one drop landing on the dark carpet, splattering into a small patch of darker color, followed by a second drop, and a third, silently spreading outward, quickly absorbed by the carpet pile, while also striking straight into my heart. Ling Wan, I called out his name, my voice carrying a tremor I hadn't even noticed myself. Those two words had been stuck in my throat for too long, carrying the taste of rust and dust as they slipped out, like old objects dug up from some corner. Sealed away for over a decade, his body gave a violent jolt, and then he began shaking his head frantically, trying to break free from my grip, his wrist twisting within my palm, his fingernails sinking into his own palm, his knuckles turning white. His strength was very small, unable to break free, every single movement fraught with despair. President Chun, you've mistaken me for someone else. His voice was very soft, squeezed out from the back of his throat with a sob, broken and hoarse. I'm not Ling Wan. My name is Wan. He was still struggling, pulling his wrist outward, shrinking his shoulders back, pushing his entire body toward the direction of the wall, as if wanting to embed himself into the wall and disappear. Mistaken you for someone else? I smiled, bitter and aching, the corners of my mouth tugging upward, yet my eye sockets stinging. Ling Wan, even if you turned to ashes, I'd still recognize you. That year in high school, in the corner of the cafeteria, you picked away a piece of my green vegetable and gave me 2 pieces of sweet and sour pork ribs and a piece of braised pork belly. You said it was compensation and told me not to mind it. Did you forget? I said it word by word, every single word sounding like it was chiseled out from the gaps of my bones, carrying the weight of more than a decade. His body began to tremble violently, as if something had shattered inside his chest. With a loud crash, all of his disguises, forced endurance, and restraint completely collapsed. He could no longer hold it back, and his tears poured down instantly. He squatted down, covering his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking violently, letting out a muffled, broken cry. It wasn't a loud, wailing cry, but rather the kind of crying method that had been suppressed for far too long, and could finally no longer be held back. Most of every single syllable was muffled by his palms, turning into a muffled sob, intermittent, as if he were afraid of being heard by others. People came and went in the hallway, A waiter carrying a tray passed by, their footsteps pausing, not daring to get close. There were guests coming out from other private rooms, drunk and holding their female companions, curiously glancing over toward this side. Some whispered amongst themselves. Some pulled out their phones, and some were pulled away by their companions beside them. Ignoring all of that, I squatted down, one hand still holding his wrist without letting go, my palm pressing against his cold skin, able to feel his pulse gradually changing from frantic into a heavy and exhausted beating. He squatted right in front of me, covering his face and crying with his entire body shaking. His thin, bony shoulders propped up that ill-fitting light purple dress, the outline of his shoulder blades clearly visible through the thin fabric. I looked at him and asked the question I had wanted to ask for so many years. Tell me, what on earth happened? My tone was filled entirely with gentleness, a stark contrast to the coldness in the private room just moments ago. Why are you here? He didn't answer, only squatting on the ground with his face covered, shaking all over as he cried. Intermittent sobs spilling out from his throat, like some injured little animal, licking its wounds alone in a dark cave. I took off my suit jacket and draped it over his shoulders. The suit was large, wrapping around his huddled shoulders and covering that ill-fitting light purple dress. The neckline revealed his slender neck and a few strands of scattered loose hair. He didn't dodge away, nor did he raise his head, only having his crying gradually quiet down into faint sobs. His shoulders no longer shook violently, yet his entire body was still trembling slightly, like a leaf that had been blown by the wind for a long time. Finally falling to the ground, yet still trembling gently, the hallway quieted down. The people watching the commotion dispersed. A waiter carrying a tray quietly bypassed us, pushed open the neighboring private room door and slipped inside. The light from the wall lamp remained dim and soft, shining down upon the two of us and casting a blurred cluster of shadows on the carpet. I squatted in front of him, one hand still holding his wrist, not exerting any force, merely gently curling my thumb against the inner side of his wrist, against that thumping, beating pulse. After a long while, he finally lowered the hand covering his face. His face was covered entirely in tear tracks, his heavy, striking makeup mostly ruined. He didn't look at me, keeping only his head lowered. He opened his mouth, his voice so hoarse that its original sound was barely recognizable. My voice so hoarse it was almost unrecognizable from how it used to sound. Chinyu, please let me go. There's still people inside waiting for you. And you're drunk. I looked at him, watching the tears slide down from his eyelashes, flowing along the curve of his cheek, pooling between his chin, and then dropping down. I've been sober for more than a decade. My voice was very soft, yet every single word was spoken with deliberate clarity, just for this moment of not being sober. His eyelashes trembled violently. His lips moved, as if wanting to say something, though in the end, nothing came out. I let go of his wrist, stood up, and then held out my hand to him. He raised his head to look at me, the smudged traces of his eye makeup, making his eyes look exceptionally large, and also exceptionally hollow. The starlight that once resided inside them had been worn down, completely clean by over a decade of life, leaving behind only exhaustion, shame, and a trace of something I couldn't understand. He didn't take my hand, bracing himself against the wall as he slowly stood up. The suit jacket slipped down a fraction from his shoulder. He instinctively reached out his fingers to gather it, gripping the dark fabric tightly, his knuckles turning white. At the end of the hallway, music could be faintly heard from inside the private room, along with Wu Qiming's laughter. He turned his face away to avoid my gaze, his voice as low as a whisper. Let's go to the back door. There's no one there. He turned and walked along the hallway in the other direction, his high heels stepping on the carpet, his footsteps light and slow. The hem of the ill-fitting light purple dress trailed behind him, fluttering slightly in the draft blowing through the hallway. My suit jacket draped over his shoulder, covered most of his body, leaving only a slender section of his lower legs exposed. I followed behind him, passing through the hallway, and pushing open a fire door marked as staff exit, stepping into a narrow stairwell. After descending 2 flights of stairs, we pushed open another fire door. The back door of io.manhwa Club led to a narrow alleyway. No neon lights, no flashy hustle and bustle. Above our heads were clotheslines and external air conditioner units, while the walls were covered in layers of small advertisements, blurred by the washing of rain. Trash cans were neatly lined up against the wall, emitting a faint, sour, rotting odor. A thread of light from the street lamp penetrated the distant alley mouth, dim and feeble, as the chilly wind poured in. He stood in the alleyway, with his back facing me, pulling the suit jacket tighter around his shoulders. Before beginning to recount, the alleyway was very quiet. The music from io.manhwa Club in the distance was blocked out by the thick walls, leaving only a low, faint drumming sound, like a heartbeat transmitted from deep beneath the earth. The external air conditioner unit overhead hummed steadily, with dripping water droplets striking the concrete ground and producing faint, shattering sounds. Lingwan stood with his back to me for a long time. The suit jacket was much too large, wrapping around him like an ill-fitting robe. He gathered the collar, his fingers gripping the dark fabric very tightly, his knuckles turning white. His shoulders were slightly tucked inward, and the line of his spine remained clearly visible through the jacket. Too clearly visible, clear enough to make one's heart ache. I stood a short distance behind him, not getting close, not urging him. The wind poured in from the alley mouth, carrying the chill of early autumn, and the sweet, starchy scent drifting from a roadside roasted sweet potato cart. He finally spoke up. The year I graduated from college. His voice was very soft, scattered instantly the moment the wind blew. He paused for a moment, as if needing to gather enough strength before he could continue speaking. My dad's business ran into trouble. His dad was named Lin Jiangwo, who ran an auto repair shop in the county seat. Back then, among the parents of the students in our year, he was considered quite well off. Every day after school, Lingwan had a car picking him up and his backpack. Always had the newest stationery, while his school uniform was also ironed flat and neat. Back at that time, his features and eyes were clean, and he had shallow dimples when he smiled, making him a girl who caught everyone's attention across the entire grade. He went into partnership with others for a building materials business, mortgaging the repair shop and borrowing a massive sum of money. Later on, the business partner ran away with all the funds, and the goods delivered were defective products, landing everything completely in his hands, his voice flat, as if he were reading a document unrelated to himself. He owed nearly $2 million. To a family in a county seat, $2 million. That was an astronomical figure. Creditors came knocking every day to splash paint, plug keyholes, and write large characters in the hallway. My mom didn't dare to go outside. My younger brother was pointed at and talked about at school. And my dad, his voice caught for a moment. My dad borrowed money everywhere to pay off debts, begging every single relative and friend. Then one day, he collapsed at a creditor's doorstep, suffering a cerebral hemorrhage that they managed to rescue him from. But he was left paralyzed down half his body, couldn't speak clearly anymore, and required people to take care of his every basic need. My mom's health was already poor to begin with high blood pressure and heart disease. After my dad's incident, she forced herself to hold on for 3 months before collapsing as well. Hospital stays, medication, and every single medical checkup all cost money. My younger brother had just entered the first year of high school back then, with great grades, just like me when I was his age. I looked at him, and saw my former self. So I quit my job. After graduating college, I had found an office job over there at an educational training institution, making $4,500 a month. Yet $4,500 wasn't even enough for my dad's monthly medication. I borrowed from everyone I possibly could. Classmates, colleagues, distant relatives. At first, some people were willing to lend, but later on, everyone started avoiding me. I could understand. Nobody's money drops from the wind. He lowered his head, his chin nearly pressing against his collarbone. Later, someone introduced me to come to Shanghai, saying money was made fast here. I knew what kind of work it was. I hesitated for a month. During that month, the debt collectors dragged my dad off the bed. My mom knelt on the ground begging them. And my younger brother came back from school, saw the ruined red paint at the doorway, didn't say a single word, went back into his room and closed the door. With a sound of reciting textbooks drifted out. The next day, I bought a train ticket to Shanghai. I knew this job wasn't respectable, knew I would be looked down upon. Yet I had no choice. His voice finally developed cracks, faint cracks, spreading out from deep within his throat. I have to stay alive, have to keep my dad alive, my mom alive, and my younger brother alive. I have to let him continue going to school, so he doesn't become the second person eating plain vegetables in the corner of a cafeteria. That sentence was spoken out from his mouth like a blade, stabbing straight into my chest. I took a step forward. Sensing it, his shoulders tightened, and his entire body shrank back toward the wall. I changed my name to Manhwa, just so I wouldn't be recognized by acquaintances, so I wouldn't let others know. That Ling One had turned into this kind of state. As he spoke, he raised his hand to wipe his eyes, his movement very quick, as if afraid of being seen by others. I wrapped myself up, living cautiously and timidly, smiling at customers every single day, pouring drinks and singing, enduring them groping and touching me, enduring those strange gazes. At night, when I returned to the rented apartment, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until I threw up. I've seen far too much of the coldness and warmth of human nature. Drunk customers call me a bitch. The head waitress docked my pay because she thought I was too reserved, and the girl sharing my table stole my cosmetics, even turning around to frame me. He turned around, his side profile facing me as he said, "Chunyu, you're a big boss now. Well, I'm just a hostess here. We've long belonged to two different worlds." He looked at me. His eyes filled entirely with shame and self-deprecation. That kind of gaze. Exactly the same as mine back in the cafeteria corner all those years ago. Just pretend you didn't recognize me, and let me go. Having said that, he pulled the suit jacket tighter around his shoulders, turned around, and prepared to leave. I reached out once again and held onto his arm, looking at him with a firm tone, my voice squeezed out from deep inside my throat, carrying a coarse, grainy hoarseness. "Ling Wan, if not for you back then, I never would have made it to where I am today." Those 2 pieces of pork ribs and that single sentence were the most precious things in my entire life. I studied with all my might, earned money with all my might, and climbed upward with all my might, not to become some big boss, but so that one day I could stand in front of you, be worthy of your gentleness, and ensure that you never again have to cautiously guard anyone's self-esteem. I don't care what you've been through, nor do I care what you do now. I will never let you go. His lips moved slightly, tears welling up and pouring out from his eye sockets. But I'm not worthy of you anymore. I'm so dirty now, so humble and low. You are the high and mighty President Chun. What kind of woman couldn't you have by your side? Why bother keeping watch over someone like me? I looked at him, word by word. In my heart, you'll always be the girl who gave me those pork ribs back then. Always clean, always precious. His eyelashes trembled violently, large tears rolling down one after another, and hitting the dark fabric of the suit jacket, soaking into leave even deeper marks. My hand holding his arm tightened slightly. Back then, you protected my self-esteem. Now it's my turn to protect you. I pulled my phone out from my pocket and dialed the number of the person in charge of Buyue Club. The phone rang twice before being picked up, and a respectful male voice came from the other end. President Shun. I issued a direct order. Manager Zhou. Wanwan's contract is void effective immediately. Erase all records. Don't allow anyone to trouble him ever again. And don't let him set foot in Buyue Club ever again. The other end of the line went silent for a second, followed by a crisp, "Understood, President Shun. I'll handle it immediately." I hung up the phone. Ling Wan looked at me, his eyes filled with disbelief and a trace of resistance. "You can't do this. I owe so much money. My dad's medical bills. My younger brother's tuition. I'll take care of it." He shook his head and took a step back. "I can't take your money. I can't owe you such a huge favor. This isn't a favor. This is what I owe you. Back then, you gave me 2 pieces of pork ribs and a touch of gentleness. That was the most precious thing in my life. This bit of money and this minor matter are nothing." He opened his mouth, wanted to say something, when right at that moment, the back door of Buyue Club was violently pushed open. A drunk man came stumbling out, his suit jacket hanging unbuttoned, his tie crooked to one side, and half a bottle of imported liquor clutched in his hand. Judging by his attire, he was a customer from one of the private rooms. He squinted his eyes and caught sight of Ling Wan standing in the alleyway. "Yo, isn't this Wan?" The drunkard grinned, staggering over, with a heavy stench of alcohol spewing from his mouth. "I saw you in the private room just now. What are you running for? Come on, come have a drink with me." He reached out to grab Ling Wan's arm. Ling Wan instinctively retreated, his shoulder slamming against the wall. The next second, my fist had already smashed into the drunk man's face. The drunkard's head tilted violently to one side, his entire body like a marionette with snapped strings, staggering back 2 steps before the back of his head struck the wall. With a hollow thud, the bottle of imported liquor slipped from his hand and flew out, shattering on the concrete ground. Glass shards and amber-colored alcohol splattered everywhere. He slid down the wall, slumping onto the ground while covering his face, and let out a muffled, tear-infused scream. I didn't look at him, turning around to look at Ling Wan. He was pressed against the wall, both hands covering his mouth. His eyes widened in shock. My right hand burned with pain. My knuckles were scraped raw, and blood seeped out from the split skin, dripping down the contours of my fingers. I paid it no mind. "Let's get out of here." Ling Wan's gaze landed on my bleeding hand. His pupils trembled slightly, and then, using the cuff of the suit jacket he was wearing, he gently pressed it against the wound on the back of my hand. The dark fabric pressed against the bleeding knuckles, a small patch of the soft cloth stained damp with blood. His movement was very light, as casual and matter-of-fact as picking away that green vegetable all those years ago. I froze in place. He kept his head lowered, his eyelashes drooping down, to cast a faint shadow across his face, his fingers pressing against the back of my hand, through the fabric of the jacket, feeling slightly cool. He didn't use to fight. His voice was very soft. Back then, nobody needed me to fight. He fell silent for a fleeting moment, then released his hand pressing against the wound. "Let's go." That night, I took Ling Wan away from Buyue Club. The driver parked the car at the mouth of the alley, a black business car, idling quietly, its taillights glowing with a dim red light in the night. I pulled open the rear door, and after hesitating for a moment, he bent down and climbed inside. I walked around to the other side and got in, sitting right beside him. The interior of the car was very quiet, the leather seats emitting a faint scent of hide, while the air conditioning vents sent out a cool breeze. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, asked nothing at all. and smoothly started the engine. Ling Wan leaned against the car window, his side profile facing me. The street lamps outside flashed past one by one, illuminating the tear tracks on his face, his ruined makeup, and his closed eyes. He had fallen asleep, or rather, pretended to fall asleep. His breathing gradually grew steady, his shoulders no longer tense, his forehead resting against the glass of the window, swaying slightly with the subtle jolts of the car body. I watched him for a very long time. From that sun-drenched afternoon in the senior high cafeteria to the hallway of Buyue Club, where he squatted on the ground, crying uncontrollably, and right up to this moment, wrapped in my jacket, falling into a deep sleep in the seat beside me. More than a decade of time flowed backward stitch by stitch in the shadows of the car. I reached out my hand and pulled the jacket that had slipped from his shoulder upward, covering his exposed shoulders. My fingers accidentally brushed against the back of his neck. His skin was ice cold. He didn't wake up, merely furrowing his brow slightly. Before smoothing it out again, I withdrew my hand, leaned back against the seat, and closed my eyes. The wound on the back of my hand was still faintly throbbing with pain. From that day on, I arranged for Ling Wan to stay in an apartment near Jinan Temple. It was a property under my own name, a 120 square meter high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing Suzhou Creek. The environment is quiet. The residential complex has great greenery, and downstairs there's a 24-hour convenience store and pharmacy. When I originally bought it, I intended to live in it myself, but it remained vacant afterward, with only a cleaner coming over to tidy up once a week. I hired the best neurology specialist in Shanghai to go to his hometown and bring his father to Shanghai for treatment, arrange a hospital ward at Huashan Hospital, hired a professional caregiver, and reformulated a rehabilitation plan. His mother's medications were all switched to imported ones, with regular health checkups and cardiology specialists following up. His younger brother's school enrollment was transferred to a key high school in Shanghai, allowing him to live on campus and visit his older sister on weekends. The debts in his family were taken care of, $2 million, which totaled $2.46 million, including interest and liquidated damages. When the finance department called to confirm the amount with me, I simply uttered a single word, "Pay it," and then hung up the phone. I did everything I possibly could do, hoping only to let him break free from the hardships of the past and start his life over again. Yet Ling Wan kept maintaining a distance from me. He lived in the apartment I arranged for him and never stepped outside. Whenever I went to see him, he would always politely pour water, sit on the other end of the couch, with his hands placed properly on his knees, like a stranger coming over as a guest, distant and formal, carrying a sense of deliberate, cautious distance, completely lacking that naturalness and gentleness from a cafeteria back in those years. Every day I would go and bring things he liked to eat: sweet and sour pork ribs, braised pork belly, stir-fried seasonal vegetables, steaming hot rice. Sometimes they were packed from restaurants, and sometimes I had the domestic helper cook them and bring them over. The first time I brought them, he stared at the sweet and sour pork ribs in the meal box for a long time, then lowered his head and said thank you, his voice very soft. His chopsticks picked up a piece of the ribs, placed it in his mouth to chew for a long time, and then he put his chopsticks down and said he was full. I looked at him without pressing further, knowing that the hurdle in his heart wasn't that easy to get over. One night, I went to the apartment to find him. When he opened the door, he was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, his hair loose and unmade up, his bare face with clean features and eyes, slowly overlapping with that girl, sitting across from me over a decade ago, except that the depths of his eyes held far too many things: exhaustion, guardedness, and that kind of deep-seated self-deprecation that I myself had once experienced. A laptop was placed on a coffee table, Its screen lit up to show a job recruitment website page. He was looking for a job. I said, "You don't need to work." "I need to." He walked back to the edge of the couch and sat down, closing the laptop. His movement was very light, yet the sound of the closing still appeared abrupt in the quiet living room. "Chinyu, don't be so good to me." He didn't look at me, his gaze falling onto the coffee table and that cup of plain water that had already gone completely cold. "I'm not worth it." I sat down across from him. "What counts as being worth it?" He didn't answer. "Tell me, what counts as being worth it? When you gave me those 2 pieces of pork ribs, did you calculate whether it was worth it? When you sat across from me and picked out the meat to give to me in front of everyone, did you think about whether it was worth it?" His eyelashes trembled slightly. "That's different." "How is it different?" "Back then," he paused. "Back then, you were worth it. Now, you're worth it too." He finally raised his head, looking at me with his eye sockets turning red, though the tears didn't fall down. "Chinyu, things between us were impossible long ago. Forget about what happened back then, and go find a clean, good girl. Find someone who matches your current status in life." His hands rested on his knees, his 10 fingers tightly interlocked together, his knuckles turning white. "Someone like me isn't worthy of having your love, not worthy of standing by your side." Every single word felt like a needle stabbing into my heart. I stood up, walked around the coffee table, and squatted down in front of him, leveling my gaze with his. He didn't move, his eyelashes merely trembling violently, his lips pressed into a tight line. "Lingwan, ever since the year of senior high, I've been in love with you for over a decade. It's not pity, it's not nostalgia, and it's not because of those 2 pieces of pork ribs or a favor I owe you. It's because that person is you. It was you who noticed me when everyone else couldn't see me. It was you who, when everyone else was ignoring me, picked away my green vegetable and pushed your meat over. Smiling as you said it was compensation. You protected my self-esteem in a way that nobody else ever paid attention to. That kind of gentleness. I've remembered it for more than 10 years. Lingwan's tears finally fell down. But I'm no longer the Lingwan of back then. Life has worn away everything I had left. My pride, my dreams, all my light is gone. It's not, I looked at him. It's still there. He shook his head, crying even harder, both hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking. "You don't understand. You don't know how I got through these past few years. Drinking with strangers every single night, being groped by them, being looked at with those kinds of gazes, while still having to smile. The sweeter the smile, the more tips I get. I was already dirty long ago, dirty from the inside out. You aren't dirty." My voice was very soft, yet carried a firmness I hadn't even realized was there. "The ones who are dirty are those people who bullied you, those people who kicked you when you were down, and added insult to injury. They're the ones who are dirty. Not you. You've never been dirty." I remained squatting in front of him without moving. The living room was very quiet, with the Suzhou Creek outside the floor-to-ceiling windows flowing silently. The lights on the opposite bank cast broken reflections onto the river surface. The low whistle of a ferry from a distance penetrated the glass and echoed faintly within the room. He finally lowered his hands, his face covered in tear tracks, his eyes red and swollen. Yet deep within the depths of his gaze, those layers of guardedness, resistance, and self-doubt had cracked open a faint gap. "Chinyu, give me some time." I nodded. "As much time as you need." From that day on, I didn't pressure him anymore, merely going to see him every day, bringing food and keeping him company, telling him about how I had made it through these past few years. The early days of starting the business, Zhang Lei's betrayal in the basement, the 3 crises where we almost went bankrupt, and the answer I hadn't spoken aloud when President Feng asked me about my motivation for starting a business. He sat on the couch and listened quietly, occasionally asking a question like, what happened next? Only to lower his eyes again right after asking, as if regretting having shown that he cared too much. I took him to Huashan Hospital to see his father. Lin Jiangwo was lying on the hospital bed, half of his body unable to move, the corner of his mouth crooked, his speech slurred and unclear. Yet the moment he saw Ling Wan, that hand of his that could still move lifted up, his fingers trembling as they pointed toward him. Ling Wan walked over and took hold of his hand. He opened his mouth and blurtingly spat out two slurred words, "I'm sorry." Ling Wan bent down, pressing his face against the back of his father's hand, his shoulders shaking violently. I stood at the doorway of the hospital room without going inside. The sunlight poured in through the window, falling onto him. I took him to stroll along the streets of Shanghai. Nanjing Road, the Bund, Tianzifang, Wukong Building. Those places we both wanted to go back then, but never managed to visit. He walked alongside me, at first keeping a distance of one arm's length, which slowly closed down to half a step. On the river embankment at the Bund, the wind was strong, blowing his hair up into the air. He reached out to tuck his hair behind his ear, turned his face, and saw that I was looking at him. "What are you looking at?" He froze for a moment, then turned his head away, the tips of his ears turning faintly red. Later on, I helped him find a job, not as charity, but an offer he secured himself by submitting a resume and interviewing. It was a curriculum development position at an educational technology company, matching the major he studied in college. It was a 9 to 5 with no overtime required. On the morning of his first day, I went to pick him up. He walked out of the apartment building, wearing a beige trench coat, his hair tied into a low ponytail, light makeup applied to his face, his features and eyes clean. He looked more and more like that girl sitting in the cafeteria over a decade ago, when he saw my car parked at the entrance. His footsteps paused for a moment, and then he pulled open the car door and sat in the front passenger seat. "You don't have to come every day," he said. "It's on the way." He glanced at me. The group headquarters was in Pudong, while his company was in Jing'an, one on this side of the Huangpu River, the other on the opposite side. He didn't expose the lie. Rumors and gossip within the social circle still managed to reach his ears. At the very beginning, it was a phone call he received from an unfamiliar number while taking a lunch break at the company. When he answered, the voice on the other end belonged to a woman, polite in tone, yet carrying thorns. "May I ask if this is Ms. Ling Wan? I'm the wife of President Chen's business partner. I heard you've been getting quite close to President Chen lately, so I just wanted to remind you. You know what position President Chen holds in the business circle, and your past experiences at Buyue Club have already spread all over the circle. President Chen looking for you is merely a passing whim out of novelty. You need to know where you stand." The phone call hung up. Every night, sitting in the company's pantry, clutching his phone, his fingers turned white. Later on, a few similar phone calls came again, some tactful, some direct. There were even people leaving comments under his social media burner account with extremely vicious wording. "Look at what kind of person she is, climbing up to a high branch. President Chen will get tired of her sooner or later. She doesn't even look in the mirror to see if she's worthy." He read those comments one by one, and then logged out of the account. That night, I went to the apartment to find him. He was sitting on the couch, with an already packed suitcase placed in front of him. "Chinyu," he raised his head to look at me, his eyes red and swollen. He had clearly been crying. "I'm leaving. Just pretend you never met me. I don't want to drag you down. Don't want you to be pointed at because of me, and don't want to ruin your reputation." He stood up and pulled the handle of the suitcase. I walked over from the doorway and pulled him straight into my embrace. He struggled for a moment. His hand slipped from the suitcase handle, and the luggage fell to the ground with a dull thud. He clenched his fists and pressed against my chest, pushing hard. But when he couldn't push me away, his fists gradually loosened, his fingers gripping the front of my shirt. I whispered softly in his ear, "What does reputation matter? What does a career matter?" His forehead pressed against my chest. "Without you, even if I possessed the entire world, it would be completely meaningless. Back then, you didn't despise me when I was at my most down and out. Now, even if everyone talks about me, I will never let you go either. Lingwan, I didn't fall in love with you on a sudden impulse. It's an obsession of over a decade. A love carved deep into my bones. You don't have to think about." He finally broke down and cried out loud in my embrace. Not that kind of repressed, muffled crying where he tried not to let anyone hear, but a completely unrestrained wail, pouring out all his grievances and insecurities in a loud, heavy cry like a child. All the grievances he had carried for so long. The insecurity, the resistance, and the self-deprecation finally collapsed at this moment. We just stood there like that, holding each other in the entryway of the apartment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Suzhou Creek flowed silently. After a long while, his crying gradually subsided, turning into faint sobs. And then he grew quiet, his forehead still pressed against my chest. "Xinyu, you're going to regret this." I regretted it for over a decade. Regretting that back then, I didn't eat one more piece of the green vegetable you picked over and gave me. He fell silent for a brief second, and then, very, very softly, a breath resembling a chuckle escaped from within my embrace. It was very faint, but that was the first time in over 10 years that I heard him laugh again. Lingwan finally let go of the emotional barriers and self-deprecation in his heart. It wasn't let go all at once. It was little by little, like a river surface frozen solid the entire winter. When spring arrives, melting inch by inch from the edges, he began to take off his heavy makeup. First, his eyeliner was drawn more lightly, and then one day, when I went to pick him up from work, he walked out of the company building. With a completely clean face, nothing applied at all. His bare face with clean features and eyes, looking exactly the same as that girl in the cafeteria back then, except for a few tiny fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the traces left behind by crying too much over these past few years. When he saw that I was looking at him, he instinctively lowered his head and raised a hand to touch his own face. I woke up late today and didn't have time to make myself look nice. He lifted his head and froze for a moment. Then the corners of his mouth curved up, revealing a shallow pair of dimples with that smile. I had waited for over a decade. He started cooking for me. The first time was on a weekend, when I was working overtime until 8 p.m. My phone vibrated. He sent a message. "Are you coming over tonight?" I cooked dinner. I stared at those 4 words for a long time, canceled a business social commitment, and drove over. Pushing open the door of the apartment, the aroma of home-cooked food hit me head-on. Sweet and sour pork ribs, stir-fried seasonal vegetables, and a bowl of seaweed and egg drop soup were set on the dining table, along with 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks. He stood at the doorway of the kitchen, his apron not yet taken off, holding a plate of freshly stir-fried green vegetables in his hands. Seeing me walk in, his gaze flickered, and he placed the dish on the table. "I don't know if it suits your taste. I haven't cooked in a long time." I sat down, picked up a piece of sweet and sour pork ribs, and put it in my mouth. The sauce was rich, the meat tender and falling apart, and the sweet and sour flavor melted across the tip of my tongue. It didn't taste the same as the cafeteria back then, yet something about it was the same, delicious. He sat down across from me, picked up his chopsticks, and placed a green vegetable into my bowl. His movement was very natural, just like more than 10 years ago. "Consider me eating one of your green vegetables." He smiled slightly, his dimples showing shallowly. "To make it up to you." I lower my head, looking at the empty space left behind in the bowl. After that green vegetable was picked away, my eye sockets stinging with acidity. After so many years, I finally tasted the flavor of those 2 pieces of pork ribs once again. Yet I knew there was still a hurdle left in his heart. That experience concerning Wiyue Club, about his self-doubt, about the gap between us. One night, I returned from working overtime at the group headquarters and stopped by the apartment to see him. Opening the door and walking in, the living room lights were dark, with only a sliver of light filtering through the bedroom door crack. He walked over and gently pushed the door open. He was sitting on the floor, his back leaning against the edge of the bed, holding a laptop on his knees. The screen's light shone upon his face, reflecting his red eye sockets. On the screen was a forum post with an eye-catching title. I heard that the girlfriend of the president of a certain tech group used to be a hostess at Wiyue Club. The replies below had already turned several pages. Such a woman, and he dares to want her? Aren't you afraid of being pointed at by others later on? He's just chasing novelty, right? He'll kick her out in a few months. Women from Wiyue Club. Those who understand, understand. What status does Chinyu hold? Does a woman like this match him? He read them line by line, without closing the page, without crying, just sitting there quietly, confirming to himself a certain outcome he had long anticipated. I sat down beside him and reached out to close the laptop. The screen's light went out, leaving only the warm yellow glow of the bedside lamp in the room. He lowered his head and remained silent for a long time. Chinyu, what they said is actually all true. I really did stay at Wiyue Club, really did work as a hostess, and really was looked at with those kinds of gazes by those people, and touched by them. His hands rested on his knees, his 10 fingers tightly interlocked together. You can find someone better, someone clean, who hasn't been dirted by life. I didn't speak. I stood up, took something out from the bedside table drawer, a photograph, a reproduction of a senior high graduation photo. The pixels were blurry. In the photo, Ling Wan stood in the second row, 4th position from the left, wearing a blue and white school uniform, smiling toward the camera with his dimples, showing faintly in light in his eyes. The edges of the photo had already begun to fray, and the fold marks were deep and shallow, having been flipped through too many times. I placed the photograph into the palm of his hand. I've looked at this photo for over a decade. He lowered his head to look at himself in the photo. Every time I couldn't hold on anymore, I would look at this photo. Down in the basement, on the night Zhang Lei betrayed me, during the 3 times I was on the verge of bankruptcy, I looked at this photo and told myself I couldn't lose. There was someone waiting for me, and I hadn't yet repaid the person who gave me light. I squatted down, leveling my line of sight with his. Ling Wan, the person I love, has never been that clean, carefree high school girl. What I love is the person who saw the boy eating plain vegetables in the corner, picked away a green vegetable, and pushed the meat over. The person who cautiously protected someone else's self-esteem. The person whose gentleness went deep into his bones. That kind of gentleness has nothing to do with what you've been through. He cradled that photograph, and his tears fell down, a single drop landing on the picture, blurring his smiling face from when he was 17. Those days at Wiyue Club aren't your stain. They're the proof that you tried with all your might for your family. And to survive, it is your resilience, not your shame. I reached out my hand to wipe away the tears on his face, gently pressing against his cheeks, soaked by tears. My movement very light. If we must talk about not being worthy, it's me who isn't worthy of you. You gave me light, and it took me over 10 years just to walk to your side. He grasped my hand tightly. He held my hand. His fingers were ice cold and trembling slightly. Chinyu, thank you for not giving up on me. And thank you for loving someone like me. I held his hand back in return, our index fingers interlocked. Don't thank me. This is what I owe you. He froze for a moment, and then broke into a smile. Tears were still hanging on his eyelashes, yet his dimples had already bloomed. The light shone upon his face, slowly overlapping with that 17-year-old photograph. At that moment, I knew the hurdle in his heart had finally begun to melt. That weekend, I took him back to my hometown, having not returned for over a decade. The county town had changed a lot. There were more tall buildings, wider streets, and even shopping malls now. Yet that road leading to the high school remained exactly the same. The plane trees were still there, their foliage shading the entire street. The small grocery store by the roadside had changed its signboard, but the freezer at the entrance was still the exact same one from back then. The school was also just like before. The security guard had been replaced and didn't recognize us. I said we were alumni coming back to take a look and registered our names. He waved his hand and let us pass. Lingwan walked beside me, and the moment he stepped through the school gates, his footsteps slowed down. The playground had been renovated, with a rubber running track laid down. A few younger schoolmates were playing basketball on the court, and the sound of the ball hitting the backboard was identical to the one from back then. The outer walls of the academic building had been repainted, yet the staircase handrail was still that same iron pole, the paint on its surface shining glossy. The cafeteria was still there, though the interior decoration had changed. The original long tables had been replaced with booth seating, warm-toned wallpaper was pasted on the walls, and the food-serving windows had increased from 2 to 4, with a much wider variety of dishes available. That spot in the corner was still there. That corner right next to the boiling water barrel, though the boiling water barrel had been moved to a different location now, leaving the corner empty with a potted green plant placed there instead. I took his hand and walked over to that corner. Do you still remember this place? He looked at that corner and nodded. I remember. You used to sit right here every day, facing away from everyone else to eat your plain vegetables and drink the free soup. His voice was very soft. The moment I walked in from the entrance back then, I saw you instantly. Out of so many people, only you were sitting quietly by yourself, which was particularly heartbreaking. I didn't want you to feel isolated, and I didn't want you to feel inferior, so I just sat over. I looked at him. The sunlight poured in through the cafeteria window, falling onto his face, at the exact same angle as over a decade ago. I never once felt isolated. I began, my voice slowly flowing out from the depths of my throat, carrying the weight accumulated over more than 10 years. From the moment you appeared, I felt that all my hardships had found their meaning. I swore to work hard, to become worthy of you. I gripped his hand tightly. These past few years, I fought tooth and nail to build my career, not to become some big boss, but simply so I could find you, so I could give you a stable life, and so you would never have to suffer any grievances again. The sunlight shone upon his face, his dimples showing faintly, yet his eye sockets turned red. Besides, what happened in the past is in the past. You did nothing wrong. You only did what you had to do, for your family and to survive. Your kindness and your resilience are more precious than anything else. What I love is who you are, not your background, and not your past. No matter what you've been through, you are still the light of my youth, and the only person I want to spend my life with. His tears fell down, not from grievance, not from shame, but from emotion and relief. With a smile on the corners of his mouth, his tears couldn't stop falling. Chen igreku, I'm sorry for making you wait so long all these years, and causing you so much worry. His voice was soft. I always used to feel that I wasn't worthy of you, always feeling that my past was a stain. But now I understand. Your love for me has never had any impurities. There's no such thing as being worthy or not. I held his hand tighter. We are both people who walked out of hardship. I understand your self-doubt and your stubborn pride, just like when you bet on me back then. For now on, we will never be separated again. I will use the rest of my life to love you well, to protect you, and to make up for all the grievances you've suffered these past years. He looked at me, tears sliding down, and a smile bloomed. Sunlight spilled over us through the cafeteria window, just as warm and gentle as it was over a decade ago. After twisting and turning, we finally returned to where we started. Only this time, I was no longer that poor kid hiding in the corner, eating plain vegetables, and he was no longer that inexperienced young girl who could only use a single green vegetable to protect someone else's self-esteem. Yet the gentleness and affection between us had never changed at all. After resolving all our emotional knots, Ling Wan and I officially got together. I brought him to meet my family. Mom was silent for a long time after finding out, then went to the kitchen and brought out a bowl of freshly simmered soup, placing it in front of Ling Wan. "Drink some soup, you've gotten this thin." Ling Wan held the bowl with his head lowered, his eye sockets red. Mom sat down across from him, didn't ask about things in the past, and didn't ask about the gossip, simply saying, "From now on, this is your home. Just tell Annie whatever you want to eat." Dad was squatting in the courtyard, smoking a cigarette. I walked out and squatted down beside him. He handed me a cigarette. I took it without lighting it. "You made up your mind?" "I made up my mind more than a decade ago, Dad." He took a drag of his cigarette, the smoke dispersing across the courtyard. He remained silent for a long time, then stood up, patted the dust off his knees, and said, "Then treat her well." He walked back in the house. I stayed squatting in place, watching his retreating figure, my throat tightening. Afterward, I took Ling Wan to meet President Fong, the investor who backed me during my most difficult times, my shareholder, and half a mentor. President Fong sat in the coffee shop, holding his drink, and sized Ling Wan up for quite a while. Ling Wan sat opposite me, holding his latte with both hands, his knuckles turning white. President Fong put down his cup and looked at me, the corners of his mouth curving slightly upward. "Chenyu, do you still remember when I asked you back then what your motivation for starting a business was? You said it was for a person." He looked toward Ling Wan. "It's him, right?" I nodded. President Fong picked up his coffee cup, tapped it lightly against Ling Wan's cup, and said, "This cup is on me. Welcome." Ling Wan froze for a moment, and then smiled, his dimples showing shallowly. I gave him a wedding. We didn't invite too many people from the business circle. All those commercial entanglements and superficial pleasantries didn't deserve to appear on this day. There were only the families from both sides. Mom, Dad, and my younger sister. My sister's coughing had largely subsided now, under the care of Shanghai's best pulmonologist. Her condition was kept under very good control. When Ling Wan's father was pushed in, sitting in a wheelchair, half of his body still couldn't move. Yet that hand that could still move kept tightly gripping Ling Wan's wrist, gripping it very tightly, gripping it very tightly. His mother sat nearby, constantly wiping away her tears. His younger brother stood behind the wheelchair, wearing the custom suit I had made for him, his height already a head taller than Ling Wan. There were also close friends present, those two business partners who had shared instant noodles with me. Back in the basement, one of them was still serving as the technical vice president within the group, while the other had gone out to start his own business and was doing very well. The two of them sat among the audience, one with red eye sockets, and the other applauding desperately. It was simple yet heartwarming. Manager Zhou from Buiyue Club had also come, wearing a low-key dark gray suit, sitting in the very last row. After the wedding ceremony ended, he walked up to Ling Wan and bowed. "Miss Ling, what happened back then was because I didn't take good care of the people under me. I'm sorry." Ling Wan shook his head and smiled at him. "It's all in the past." The wedding was held at an estate in the suburbs. Not the kind of dazzling, luxurious clubhouse, but a place recommended by President Fong. It featured a vast lawn planted with ginkgo trees. In autumn, the leaves turned golden, falling onto the ground like a layer of scattered gold. The sunlight was wonderful that day. Ling Wan walked over from the other side of the lawn wearing a wedding dress. The wedding dress was custom-made by a designer I found, with a simple design, free of too many complex laces and bead embroidery, featuring only small clusters of delicate floral patterns embroidered along the hem of the skirt. He wore no veil on his head, his hair swept up to reveal his slender neck, and his face touched up with light makeup, his features and eyes clean. The sunlight shone upon him, the hem of his wedding dress brushing across the lawn and stirring up a few golden ginkgo leaves. He was unspeakably beautiful, his eyes filled entirely with gentleness, completely devoid of the fatigue and inferiority he had in the corridors of Buyue Club, devoid of the shame and despair when recounting his past in the narrow alley, and devoid of the grievance and anxiety when crying in my arms in the apartment entryway. There was only light, that very same ray of light I saw in the cafeteria corner a decade ago, completely identical. I stood beneath the flower arch waiting for him. He walked up to me, raised his head, and his dimples bloomed faintly. I held his hand and slowly began. Back in senior high, you used a single green vegetable and 2 pieces of pork ribs to illuminate my life and give me a goal to strive for. I looked at him, his eyes already glistening with tears. For over a decade, I never forgot, never gave up, and finally waited for you. For the rest of our lives, I will never let you suffer a single grievance again, nor will I let you endure a single bit of hardship. I will give you all my gentleness and love, make up for all your regrets, and walk with you through every single year to come. His hand trembled slightly in my palm, tears sliding down from his eye sockets, while the corners of his mouth carried a smile. Back then, I only did a very small thing. I never expected you to remember it for so long. Xinyu, thank you for not giving up on me, and thank you for loving someone like me. He smiled, tears still hanging on his eyelashes, yet his dimples had already bloomed. The sunlight shone upon his face, the hem of his wedding dress fluttering gently in the breeze. For the rest of our lives, I will stay by your side, never leaving or forsaking you. I lowered my head and kissed his forehead. Thunderous applause erupted from the audience below. Mom was wiping away her tears. Dad turned his back away, as his shoulders trembled once. My younger sister was holding up her phone to record a video. President Fong sat in the front row, holding a glass of champagne, with a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. And manager Zhou stood in the very last row, clapping vigorously. Ling Wan's father sat in his wheelchair, raising that hand that could still move, and pointing his trembling fingers toward us. The corners of his mouth crooked, yet he was clearly smiling at us. The obsession and longing of more than 10 years had finally come to a complete and satisfying close at this moment. After marriage, our life was peaceful and happy. I was no longer that workaholic who only knew how to work. I learned to leave the office before 6 p.m., learned not to answer work calls on weekends, and learned to set my phone to silent. So we could curl up on the couch together and watch an old movie. I would carve out more time to accompany him, to take him traveling. He had always wanted to go to Yunnan, so we stayed in Dali for half a month, spending every day cycling along Irai Lake, wandering aimlessly through the alleys of the ancient town, and sitting on the rooftop terrace of the inn watching the clouds. The clouds drifted over from the direction of Tsangshan Mountain, in massive fluffy billows, blindingly white. He leaned against my shoulder with his eyes half closed, like a cat basking in the sun. I accompanied him to eat our way through the food of every street and alley. Not those Michelin-starred restaurants, but the small eateries he found scrolling online, the little noodle shops hidden deep in the laneways, the pan-fried bun joint that had been open for decades, and a breakfast stall where the owner knew every old neighborhood regular. He bit into a pan-fried bun, the hot soup spilling out and scalding the corner of his mouth, causing him to hiss softly through his teeth. Yet his eyes curved into crescent moons. We did the things we wanted to do back then, but never got to. Waiting in line for 2 hours at Disneyland to ride the roller coaster. We're at the highest point. He shrieked and grabbed onto my hand. Going to Jay Chou's concert, where amidst the sound of tens of thousands singing in unison, he leaned against my shoulder and softly hummed along. And going to Joshan to watch the sunrise. Climbing out of bed at 4:30 a.m. to sit by the seaside wrapped in a blanket, waiting for the sun to slowly arch its way up from beneath the horizon, dyeing the entire sea in golden red hues. He kept the household in immaculate order, not out of some deliberate obligation, like completing a task, but through a few pots of green dill tended on the balcony, their vines cascading down with lush vibrancy. Through the yogurt I loved to drink always being stocked in the fridge, and through him remembering that my mom preferred softer rice. My dad liked his tea a bit stronger, and my younger sister couldn't eat spicy food. He treated my family like his own, dragging me back to eat at my parents' place every month, accompanying mom to the vegetable market, linking arms with her while each of them carried a plastic bag, and teaching Dad how to use a smartphone over and over again, without ever showing a hint of impatience. He took my sister out shopping to buy clothes, the two of them coming back laden with bags and packages, chattering excitedly about which piece looked better. His own family was also well cared for. His father's condition grew more and more stable. After persevering with rehabilitation training for 2 years, he was already able to stand up by holding onto the handrail. On the day he stood up for the very first time, the corner of his mouth crooked, as he indistinctly called out Wan Wan. Ling Wan squatted down beside the rehabilitation equipment, covering his face and crying for a long time. Not tears of sadness, but the kind of crying that came from finally having waited so long for this moment. His younger brother successfully passed the exams to enter college at Shanghai Jiaotong University. On the day the acceptance letter arrived, Ling Wan held that piece of paper and stared at it for a long time, then looked up at me, his eyes sparkling bright. "It's the same university you went to." I took the acceptance letter, looking at his brother's name printed upon it. He scored better than I did back then. His brother stood nearby, scratching the back of his head, the tips of his ears burning red. "Brother, sister, I'll definitely study hard from now on. No need to rush." I patted his shoulder. "Just do whatever you want to do. You don't have to be chased around by life, the way we were back then." He froze for a moment, and then nodded vigorously. Everything was moving in a good direction. Occasionally, we would return to my hometown together, returning to that high school, returning to that high school, returning to that cafeteria. The cafeteria staff had changed entirely, but one older employee was still there. She recognized me. "Aren't you that young man who used to sit in the corner every day eating plain vegetables?" Then she looked over at Ling Wan. "And you're that young girl who added meat to his bowl." Her eyes crinkled into slits as she smiled. "I always said, the two of you were bound to make it." We ordered 1 order of plain vegetables and 1 order of sweet and sour pork ribs, sitting in the exact same corner as back then. The potted plants were still there, having grown quite a bit taller, their leaves a deep, glossy green. The sunlight streamed in through the window, at the exact same angle as a decade ago. He picked up a piece of pork rib and put it in my bowl, his movement completely natural, just like it was back then. "To make it up to you. Don't turn your nose up at it." I picked up a piece of vegetable and put it in his bowl. "Back then you ate my greens. Now it's my turn to eat yours. We're even now." He froze for a moment, and then smiled, his dimples shallow, light shining in his eyes, exchanging a mutual smile. All of the past, and all of the hardship, transformed into gentle companionship. I often think to myself, if Ling Wan hadn't been there back then, what would I look like right now? Perhaps I'd still be that self-doubting, poor kid. Perhaps after graduating high school, I'd be hauling bricks at a construction site, making 80 yuan a day when there was work like my dad, squatting in the courtyard, smoking one cigarette after another when there wasn't, smoking them back to back. Perhaps never being able to escape that small work site for the rest of my life. Struggling in the mud forever. Perhaps not. But I definitely wouldn't be who I am today. It was his appearance that changed my entire life. It was his gentleness that gave me the motivation to move forward. It was his kindness that let me know that even with a humble background, one could still possess a light of their own. And I spent over a decade climbing from the mud to the very peak, finally guarding my light and making up for all my regrets. Today, Ling Wan and I have been married for 5 years, and we have a 3-year-old daughter, whose nickname is Wan Wan, named after Ling Wan himself. He said, this name used to be his hidden self, and now he wanted to openly and proudly give it to his daughter, hoping that she would never have to hide who she is for the rest of her life. Our daughter takes after him. Her features and eyes are clean, and when she smiles, 2 shallow dimples appear at the corners of her mouth. The first time she learned a song at kindergarten, she came back, stood in the middle of the living room, and sang it to us in her cute, milky voice. She forgot the lyrics halfway through, scratched the back of her head, and let out a little chuckle. Ling Wan picked her up and kissed her little cheeks. The sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, falling over the mother and daughter. I stood nearby watching them, my chest filled to the brim with something so warm that it was almost overflowing. The group continued to thrive. President Fong retired, transferring the shares in his hands over to me, and saying it was time for him to travel around the world. I accompanied him to the airport. He patted my shoulder, said nothing at all, just gave a slight smile, and turned to walk through the security checkpoint. I remained a successful person in the eyes of others. During a media interview, a reporter asked me the secret to building a business from scratch. I said there was no secret, just a promise that had to be fulfilled. The reporter pressed on, asking what kind of promise. I didn't answer. Some words are only meant to be spoken to a single person. Someone asked online, who are you most grateful to on the road to building a business from scratch? I saw that question. Hesitating for a moment, I still clicked open the response box. He was the white moonlight of my youth. Back in senior high, I sat in the corner of the cafeteria every day, eating plain vegetables and feeling self-conscious down to my very bones. He sat down beside me, picked away a piece of green vegetable, and then put all of his sweet and sour pork ribs and braised pork belly into my bowl, saying, I'm taking one of your greens. This is compensation. Don't turn your nose up at it. He protected my self-esteem in a way that no one else ever noticed. Those 2 pieces of ribs in that single sentence became the sole obsession of my life. I studied desperately, worked desperately, and climbed desperately upward, not to become some big boss, but just so that one day I could stand in front of him, without needing to lower my head anymore, without needing to dodge away anymore, and without feeling inferior anymore. More than a decade later, I found him. He had experienced a lot of hardship, had been crushed by life, had been pushed to the edge of desperation, and had been forced to do things he wasn't willing to do. But in my heart, he is forever that girl who gave me pork ribs back then. Forever clean, forever precious. Today, he is my wife, and we have a daughter, whose nickname is Wan Wan. It was he who, during my most destitute and self-conscious moments, gave me gentleness and hope, gave me a goal to strive for, and let me know that this world is worth living in. After the response was posted, the comments section exploded. Some people said it was made up, asking how there could be such a coincidence. Some people said it brought them to tears, reminding them of the person they liked in their youth. Some people asked, what about afterward? What happened after the reunion at the nightclub? I didn't reply anymore, because the story that followed belonged only to the two of us. Many people feel that a romance reunited at a nightclub won't last long. Many people feel the gap between us is too wide, and that we won't be happy. Yet we proved with time that true love never cares about backgrounds, never cares about the past, and only cares about each other's genuine feelings. Back then, he guarded my self-esteem. Today, I guard his entire life. Back then, he gave me a ray of light. Today, I give him a home. I went from that poor kid eating plain vegetables to Chunyu, who could give him the whole world. Not to show off, and not to prove anything, but simply to fulfill the promise of my youth. Simply to ensure that the girl who illuminated my youth would never suffer another grievance. Yesterday evening, when I came home from work, I pushed open the door and the aroma of cooking wafted over. My daughter was building blocks on the living room carpet. Halfway through, they collapsed, and she furrowed her little brow and started building again. Langwan was cooking dishes in the kitchen, an apron tied around his waist, his hair casually clipped up with a hairpin, a few stray strands of hair falling beside his ears. I walked over and hugged her from behind. The spatula in her hand paused for a second, and then she continued stir-frying. You're back. Yeah. I rested my chin on his shoulder. The sweet and sour pork ribs in the pot were bubbling away, the thick sauce coating every single piece of rib and casting an amber luster under the lights. How do you think of making this today? Wanwan said she wanted to eat it. He turned his head slightly to look at me, the corners of his mouth curving. I asked, is that the big Wanwan or the small Wanwan? He smiled and didn't answer. The spatula flipped over, and the ribs rolled around in the pot. Both of them want to eat. I tightened my arms around him. Life twists and turns, and fate is truly wondrous. Those people you once thought were out of reach, and that obsession you hid deep in your heart for over a decade. As long as you try hard enough and are steadfast enough, you will meet again one day, and things will reach a fulfilling end. I lowered my head and pressed close to his ear, my voice very soft, so soft that only he could hear it. Wanwan, thank you for appearing in my youth and illuminating my gloomy life. The spatula in his hand paused for a second, and then he turned around and stood on tiptoe, leaving a kiss on the corner of my mouth. It was light, carrying the sweetness of the sweet and sour pork ribs. You're welcome, he smiled, his dimples shallow, light shining in his eyes, because you're my light, too. In the living room, our daughter finally finished building her blocks. Clapping her hands, she giggled and called out, Daddy, Mommy, come look. Outside the window, the Suzhou River flowed silently, and the lights of the entire city brilliante illuminated the night. This world is worth living in because of you.